Mobile is not going to replace a technician. AI is not going to replace a technician. You need people to do the job. The idea of mobilizing and taking advantage of this new technology or newer technology is to make them safer, make them more efficient, hopefully increase their job satisfaction and ensure that we all continue to keep the lights on.
Hi everyone, I'm glad you're here. This podcast is all about modern day engineering and maintenance challenges, and most importantly, the role of IT to make the workplace easier, safer, and better. It's a space to share insights, have meaningful conversations, and find practical solutions together. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you find value in our discussions and enjoy our content. Dave, thanks for joining. Welcome to Shift Log. For the benefit of everyone joining the session, why don't you tell us who you are, what your background is?
Thanks, Deepal, and thanks for inviting me. Well, I'm Dave Robson. I've been in and around this business we call IT for more than 30 years, which kind of ages me a little bit. But primarily for the purpose of this interview, I've been working in the enterprise asset management space for approximately 16, 17 years now. I started off in device management back in the days before smartphones ever existed, and have worked all the way through coming into SAP back in 2011, 2012. And I know that we're talking about primarily SAP Enterprise Asset Management as part of this series, and looking at all the aspects around that within the asset intensive industries. I've been in charge of business development on a global scale, on a regional scale, and met an awful lot of clients with an awful lot of challenges and problems in the world of asset management.
Fantastic. So you mentioned predominantly you're from enterprise asset management background when it comes to doing the jobs that you have done. So is it fair to say most of your experience is from device management and mobile execution side of things, or do you have other experience in data engineering, data and that side as well?
I think these things are linked, but my main focus has been on how do we mobilize the operations of asset management, particularly down to things like device selection. There's a lot of areas where, for instance, you might be working in hazardous environments where there is a desire to take your work execution into a mobile phase, but your average smartphone is not fit for purpose. In terms of the data side of things, that's a key aspect, because as with anything, if your data is not solid and constructed and defined in a particular way, then that's going to compromise any solution, including a mobile solution that you might be considering. So there are aspects around that, but it's primarily been driven from enterprise management, and a significant amount of that has been around mobile, yes.
Okay, great. So in mobile side, so we call it enterprise asset management. Mobile is a bigger subject, but we call it EAM. Just tell us about EAM mobile, a special application of EAM mobile, and then also connected to that, the benefits around that for the communities who uses that.
Well, hopefully people listening to this will have some interest in asset management or enterprise asset management. And a lot of companies are using tools, software tools, to help manage that asset environment. And when we're talking about asset intensive industries, we're not talking about just a few assets that you might have dotted around your building. We're talking about large scale transportation, oil and gas with refineries, utilities with pipes and pumps and substations and wiring, including gas. So there's a vast amount of work being done, and we see that every day. Driving down your local street or walking down your local street, you will see vans and engineers, people at telegraph poles, etc. Now, a lot of this is done on the basis of that enterprise asset management system, but not everybody is using mobile technology to assist in that work execution. And trying to explain clearly to people who are perhaps not familiar with what the mobile benefits might be. For instance, a lot of companies will produce work orders, as they're called, so work to be done.
Mm.
That could be quite complex, it could be quite simple. It could be for a corrective maintenance purpose or an emergency purpose, for instance, a gas leak. It could be preventative. For instance, as you service your car, you have to service your assets to increase the longevity and make sure that utility company, for instance, are keeping the lights on. Now, there's a lot of work to be done, and how do you maximize the work being done by technicians and engineers as opposed to filling out forms, pieces of paper, following instructions, maybe getting a bit complacent at times as well, and not necessarily following the particular instructions in the order in which they're meant to be conducted. So mobile can bring benefits in this area by ensuring, for instance, that a technician going into what could be a hazardous environment, for instance, a gas leak from a gas main, that they are completing their safety checks before starting to do any work of any description. It's easy to oversee that with a mobile device and make that a mandatory part of the process. Then it can also be, you can install a critical path to say that you have to do A before C before D, etc. This can be quite finite if you want it to be. It doesn't have to be that way, but the levels of control, the levels of compliance, especially with a lot of industries we deal with in mobile, are often regulated. So be it the water industry with Ofwat, Ofgen, there are certain rules and regulations that need to be followed and to be adhered to. And by having an integrated mobile solution talking to your back-end enterprise asset management system, that allows that reporting and proof of work being done, the accountability, all of that becomes a lot simpler to produce on behalf of those companies. So this is just scratching the surface of the potential benefits, but really taking that, what is a relatively manual process and quite tricky to administer, taking a mobile device to the point of execution is saving time, a lot of effort, is ensuring compliance to certain procedures and policies. And the data accuracy, which you mentioned about data before, is increased significantly by putting these mandatory options in place.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So what I picked up from that answer is that usually mobile solutions are known for efficiency. You go and talk to the clients of different software users. What you say is efficiency is one of the things that come across. But what you just pointed out is it's not just the efficiency, but there is a element of de-risk in the operation as well.
Unfortunately, we've heard on the news from time to time, there can be some significant where it's literally a life and death matter. And if assets, as they're called, are not maintained properly, or perhaps mistakes are made, which is inevitable, sadly, but trying to de-risk that as much as possible to prevent such incidents and accidents happening is absolutely critical, and that is enhanced significantly by the use of mobile technology.
So mobile is an area where every day you see a lot of advancements, like many of the other areas as well. Now, I'm sure you have been involved in an era where the mobile phones were massive, right? And the technologies were primitive. Do you want to talk about a little bit about that era as well and how it came to? I'm sure it would be interesting to hear that.
Sure, I guess it depends on your age. As you can tell, I've experienced quite a lot during my working life in IT. So I guess when I first got started in device management back in the noughties at some point, if you think back then, it seems almost impossible to believe now, but smartphones didn't exist. Mobile phones did, but smartphones didn't. And a lot of utility companies in particular that I was dealing with, and interestingly, facilities management companies were another key area where devices were being used to some extent to administer work in some way, shape, or form. If you think about facilities management, you have inspection rounds, daily activities that are quite simple to mobilize, digitize, even at a rudimentary level, as was back then. But these devices were quite utilitarian in look and feel, typically run on a Windows mobile platform. There was no Android devices or any iPhone or iOS to speak of at that point in time. And there were challenges on how you manage, how you maintain connectivity. Battery life was a biggie. So when it came to device management, you're provisioning devices, because the thought now that we can just download an application, provision it, lock it to the company standard, and use it on a bring your own device was a pipe dream back 15 plus years ago. So how do you provision those applications? Well, what used to happen was there was one particular project, 5,000 Motorola devices being provisioned manually by people, as if setting up a PC or a laptop. That takes a lot of time, a lot of overhead. Then they go out into the field. Then there's training the technicians on the applications. And then you have this big issue with battery life and connectivity. So the mobile networks were not the same as they are today. Some areas just didn't have any mobile networks, so they were having to rely on what we now call offline capability, which is pretty fundamental and standard. So working through all of that and trying to maintain battery life for an 8-hour shift. So there's quite a comical thing looking back on it, where all of these devices came with something called bubble breaker. Some of the listeners might be familiar with that. It's an easy game to play, bit of fun, or certainly was back then. And there was this big issue that we have to lock bubble breaker down, because if technicians start playing bubble breaker in their lunch hour whilst they're having their sandwich and a cup of coffee, we're going to burn the battery life. So they can't play bubble breaker. And such an odd thing, but caused some consternation amongst the engineers and the technicians, because they felt like their playtime was being affected. So we had all these sorts of challenges. But the interesting thing is, if you look at some of those challenges and then bring that into the more modern environment of smart technology, it took some time for typically asset-intensive industries around transportation I was working with at the time, utilities, some oil and gas, to really trust the integrity of a smartphone. Not only the operating system and the ability to create apps, which has come leaps and bounds over the last 10 years or so, but also the rugged nature of a device, because the thought was that technicians will throw these devices in the back of a van, they'll mistreat them. There was a lot of if you were selling devices back then, the integrity, the ingress protection, you could drop it in water, you could have it in a windy, sandy environment. There was a 3-meter drop to concrete that, if that happened, certain devices could sustain such treatment. And we've moved a long way, because now people are very familiar with mobile technology. Most people have mobile phones and smartphones of some description, and they're used to the nature of them. And there seems to be more respect for your device than was ever thought was possible. There was one large implementation with a big transport company in London, where they took an active decision to give all of their technicians an iPad. Now, at the time, cost of your average iPad standard was around £300, £299, £300, that sort of figure. Doesn't sound a lot today. The corresponding, I think they had both Motorola and Intermec devices at the time, but the standard ruggedized device was probably 5 times, and depending on the specification, could be 6 or 7 times the cost of an iPad. So they put a big campaign out to say, well, we're going to run these iPads. We're going to give you an iPad. You can take it home. You can use it. You can let your family, your children play with it. As long as you look after it and keep it for the work needs of the following day, we have no problem with that. And people piped up in turn and said, well, what if they break them? What if they crack? What if they drop them? I said, yeah, well, that's going to happen from time to time, but we could replace this 5 times over the course of a 3-year write down for the cost of one device that also could get broken. So they took a very strategic view to make those engineers and technicians feel that they had a benefit from the company with something as simple as an iPad. So things have come on a long way. I don't know whether that's answered your question, but some meandering insight from me.
Certainly did. I think very interesting to hear that. I think the journey, mobile technologies, devices, and even the software apps came through, right? Now, if you really look at it, the thinking of the way the technology has caught up and then how mobile technologies changed over the last 5 years, do you have a view on whether, I'm sure you have a view, what I mean to ask is that, what is your view on in terms of using this mobile solution, especially on enterprise asset management application side, technicians, engineers? Do you think for the advancements made in the recent years, do you expect a more usage, or is it in par with what you see these days?
It's an interesting question, and one that is somewhat difficult to predict. I've been selling and talking to customers about mobilizing their workforce with mobile applications, mobile technology, for the last, 15 years or so. And what strikes me is there are still a number of companies where the arguments for moving from their current solution to a mobile solution are the same as they were 10 or 15 years ago. Mobilization of something that's manual. So we can be as sophisticated as we like, but it can often relate to where an organization is on their enterprise asset management maturity. What are they really doing in terms of that technology? More companies than you might imagine are still stuck, might be an unfair word, but stuck in that sort of reactive. We plan some work, we do some work. When there's a problem, we fix it. And that sort of reactive nature, just doing things by rote. And we've always done it this way, so why shouldn't we continue? When you get people coming in a bit more progressive and saying, well, I want to take advantage of technology. I understand that it can benefit my business. I can help reduce things like travel time. There's a green impact to that. I don't want to be storing 7-10 years of records in filing cabinets or off-siting those to some Iron Mountain facility where I can store all of this in my own data in the cloud, wherever it might be, that nowadays will meet that regulatory compliance. It didn't used to, but now it does. So if you're more progressive and willing, it's kind of an easier concept to understand. But sometimes just the base level, you don't have to print off work orders. You can send a work order or a set of work orders straight to a technician on a mobile device. So when he leaves his driveway or garage in the morning in his van, car, whatever, he already knows where he's going and what work he needs to do. He doesn't have to come into a depot necessarily to pick up his work orders, to pick up his spare parts. There's so many things that have moved on, but they're still quite fundamental in the concept of why go mobile. But then if you look at more exciting technology where we have things like visual inspections, we have drones being used to feed information, we have IoT sensors feeding asset health information into your enterprise asset management system, where you can make informed and better preventative decisions. You can adjust your maintenance cycles. You can do more with less. Often, that's an increase in efficiency. So your CFO is going to like that. Your chief operating officer is going to like that. You don't have to keep increasing the workforce. You can improve the training because you can add specialists on a phone call, on a video call, to help a technician who's perhaps not as experienced as they could be in a particular area where they've got a problem with an asset or a corrective maintenance issue. There's many areas that can be taken advantage of with technology as we move forward. And although it's still quite formative in many ways, no doubt AI will continue to be prevalent. Everyone's got AI after their title nowadays. On LinkedIn, it would appear. And that's going to drive more innovation in this area. But in many ways, you still need that very significant skill set of those engineers and those technicians to know what they're doing, to have the qualifications to be able to administer, electricity conversations, around their certification. All of those things need to be taken into account and not diminished in any way. Mobile is not going to replace a technician. AI is not going to replace a technician. You need people to do the job. The idea of mobilizing and taking advantage of this new technology or newer technology is to make them safer, make them more efficient, hopefully increase their job satisfaction, and ensure that we all continue to keep the lights on.
Do you see, I think you partly answered this question before, in terms of the industries, you talked about number of asset-heavy industries. Do you see a clear difference between the asset-heavy industries using mobile devices for maintenance and engineering compared to other industries like retail?
There are differences, of course. If you think one of the areas from a personal perspective that I worked in quite exclusively whilst I was at SAP is the utilities sector. And historically, they have actually been quite innovative, not by any means leading edge or bleeding edge, but when there is an established technology that they have considered could benefit their operational efficiency, they've often wanted to invest. What I found in that sector in particular, particularly the water industry, which we know is in a little bit of turmoil in the UK in particular at the moment, is that having invested, the execution has been lacking. Now, whether that's down to budget, whether that's down to lack of understanding, whether it's down to user adoption, is difficult to tell sometimes. But they have been, the utility sector in general has been quite open to new technology, but established new technology, if that makes any sense. I think the oil and gas industry has challenges because you do have explosive areas, ATEX zones to consider, and device technology becomes a little bit more complex at that point because you need either a device or it needs to be in a secure case of some description that will not spark, because then we have catastrophes which we need to avoid. And the whole purpose of this is around safety and efficiency. So there is uptake, but not as much as I would have envisaged by now, having looked at this over the past 10 or 15 years. Transportation is an interesting one because some of the larger rail networks and metro, for want of a generic term, tube network areas, both in the UK and in numerous major conurbations in the US, have definitely bought into mobile technology. They see that as very beneficial. And nowadays, of course, it's easy to overlook the benefit of having what's called offline and online solutions. But the ability for a technician to download their work orders, understand what needs to be done without necessarily needing connectivity, because they might be underground or in an environment where it's not suitable to have a Wi-Fi network or a 3, 4, 5G network, that is hugely beneficial to people considering mobile, because we're all very familiar with applications on our phone, but unless you've got connectivity, most of them don't work. It's a different world when you come to administering enterprise asset management. So I think I would be surprised if more than 30-35% of utilities, oil and gas companies are properly taking advantage of mobile right now. I think transportation, including some of the airports, where you've got linear assets as well as with transportation where there were linear assets, are probably a little bit more advanced, not a little bit more advanced, but have the uptake is probably slightly higher. But again, with the advancements, they're not necessarily at this point taking advantage of all the enhancements that have been made over the last maybe 3 to 5 years. So there's a time lag.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. So at the beginning of in your intro, I think you talked about the fact that you have worked with SAP and you have worked for SAP as well in the past. Let's move our attention to SAP's mobile solution, SAP Service and Asset Manager. Give us a little bit of background of that, and then while touching upon its history as well.
Sure. So for those of you who know what Service and Asset Manager is, it's the mobile extension for SAP EAM, or plant maintenance, as it still is sometimes referred to. Back in 2011, 2012, SAP bought a company that I was working for called Cyclo. Some of you may know that. Cyclo had a product called Work Manager. Interestingly, they had a Work Manager product for SAP and also a Work Manager product which was virtually identical for IBM Maximo. SAP they entered into a co-innovation agreement, which I affectionately call a try before you buy scenario, in 2009. And in 2012, I think it was June 2012, physically bought Cyclo. And then the Work Manager product then became part of the SAP portfolio. Various situations, there were still people, I heard just a few months ago, there was still somebody still had Work Manager, using Work Manager on their SAP environment, but knew they needed to change quite soon. But over time, that product has been obviously developed and morphed into what we now call SAP Service and Asset Manager. And it is an extension to EAM. It's an integrated solution as well. So there are other companies, and this is not there's no need to bash the competition. There's some very good tools out there, mobile tools out there, that can be integrated into numerous back-end EAM systems out there. The benefit of having an integrated system out of the box, firstly, if you're an SAP customer, you already get Enterprise Asset Manager with your solution, be you still on ECC or fortunate enough to now be on S4 and considering perhaps going into the cloud. That already exists within your environment. It's part of what you've bought. Having an integrated solution, the benefits of that are quite vast, and probably you could spend an entire podcast just discussing why that is a better solution than integrating, especially when you get into complex environments, those real asset intensive environments where you're dealing with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of assets that need to be managed. Being able to utilize everything in your back end and have that sync seamlessly with your front end solution. Any upgrades that happen, especially if you're now considering or have gone into the cloud, where you have upgrades that are being developed by SAP on a regular basis, virtually forced upon you, then knowing that your solution will work once you flick the upgrade button is quite important to you. And those guarantees simply can't be made with other solutions. That's not to say they wouldn't work. As I said, this is not about competition bashing, but it's very clear that that integrated solution would benefit your business incredibly.
Thanks for that. So I think SAP Service and Asset Manager releases versions twice a year, May and October. So there are loads of features that is released. But if you put yourself in an engineer or technician's shoes, what do you think would be the most attractive one or two or three things in SAP Service and Asset Manager which come really handy in your day-to-day life?
Okay, well, depending on what your start point is, whether you're currently using a paper-based or simply just a terminal located somewhere where you have to report your work order activity, or indeed using a different mobile solution, would depend on your viewpoint, I would think. Essentially, you have a very familiar overview in terms of the numbering, your work order numbering, the tasks, the work order flow. Those things are familiar to you, but much more easy to digest. It's a simple to use tool as well. You don't need to carry around your pencil and your piece of paper, right? It's a very simple to use tool. And it gives you that ease and knowledge, that pathway to start to finish throughout your day. Now, that could be that you are working on a complex work order that's going to take several days to finish and you're part of a team or a gang that are working. It could be that you have 25 work orders as completing the day because they're all simple and easy tasks. But having that flexibility, again, the thought that you can wake up in the morning, you can have your work device, or indeed if you're using bring your own device, you have your work orders already there for you. You haven't got to go anywhere. You know what you're going to do today. You know what you need to do. And depending on the way in which your organization sets it up, you might even be able to choose the order in which you do them. It's the simplicity and the efficiency. And we talk about wrench time or spanner time if you're in the UK, I guess. And I don't know about everybody, but the job that you've trained to do and have been qualified to do arguably is important to you. Admin isn't your favorite thing. So the least amount of admin, travel time, the more amount of time doing the job that you're hopefully enjoying doing should add some benefit to your day as well. I hope that answers the question.
Just moving a little bit more to looking at the challenges. Obviously, it looks like genuinely the right thing to do, go for a mobile solution. But yet, as you touched upon before in the interview as well, you talked about it's not used that often as well. In your view, let's focus on service and asset manager and SAP clients. What do you think the challenges are which just stops the companies from taking that benefit?
Now, obviously, depending on who's holding the purse strings, depends on what budget may or may not be available. Something I've said for years now is there are very few companies I've ever come across where there was a chief maintenance officer. It will fit under operations. It might fit under finance. There are various ways in which companies have set up in terms of where the maintenance operation fits in its overall hierarchy. And that in and of itself becomes a challenge because projects need to be funded, projects need to be sponsored, and they need to be done in the right way. They will remain nameless, but I've spoken to a number of companies just in the last 2 or 3 years where we've gone in to talk to them about a mobile scenario. And they said, yeah, we did this. We bought into this technology or that technology, some of it quite reasonable technology, but it wasn't really used. The technicians just reverted back to whatever the previous solution or paper-based solution might have been. And that user adoption has often been the barrier to success. So let's assume you have a budget. Let's assume you have a sponsor. Orders have been placed. Scopes of work have been agreed. Contracts have been signed. But you absolutely need to get those users, those technicians, the people who are going to be using the system engaged at the absolute outset of any project. If you do that, they're part of the solution. They become your internal sales force, talking to other technicians, the rest of the business, about how wonderful this solution is because they're designing it, they're helping configure it, they're liaising with your implementation partner and your in-house team on what this is going to mean and how it's going to benefit them. If what you do is effectively present them with a solution, having spent 6 months or a year developing it in-house, and you haven't engaged any of the operational technicians, engineers, supervisors, planners, schedulers in that process and just dumped a solution on them, they're going to pick holes in it. However good you think it is, they're going to pick holes in it. It's not going to be as fit for purpose as it could be. So those challenges are quite key, and I've seen them happen, and I've seen projects fail quite regularly, which is very sad.
Thanks for that, Dave. I think very insightful. You may have partly answered this question. You talked about the challenges that stops people from making use of the technology. Are there any prerequisites that we can handle before? Not the IT stuff, not setting up systems, etc. But from the business standpoint, are there things that the companies can do to alleviate those?
I think so. It obviously depends on individuals and company culture. And these projects, interestingly, can be sponsored from more than one area of the business. It could be being driven quite literally from a CEO type perspective. It could be being driven from an IT perspective. So you have to look at the individual business case as to who's driving it and what the perceived benefits of this project are going to be, because those need to be satisfied. I think you also need to look at, well, firstly, getting the right team, even if it's just the heads of whatever departments that are going to be effective or the interested parties. Those guys need to get together. There needs to be a community of interest. There needs to be an understanding as to what role they and their departments will play in this overall strategy moving forwards, and the deployment of the solution, let alone the final end use case of the solution. So really having that communication internally, which we all think happens in every company, but sadly there is still silos and different objectives driving particular areas of the business. So where a business can come together, put that initial team of people together to really explore, preferably with their consultant partner, their implementation partner, there may be more than one, but really get all parties talking early on, because that could really change the scope and the future of that project. Also, it's sound for any IT project, because this is ultimately an IT delivery, despite the business benefits and process benefits that it delivers. This often sits with IT in some way, shape, or form. You need a sponsor. Having somebody internally with the right credibility and seniority within a company to sponsor is a sure way of better ensuring your success. Without a sponsor, projects get put on hold, projects fail, projects stall. Also, to discuss a governance model and a regular update leading up to the project start. Regular updates. Have we prepared everything? Have we got all the right people in play? You said systems, not necessarily, but are the systems going to be made available? All of the criteria, the pre-work that needs to be done with any project, if all that can be done in a structured way, with a structured plan, then the chances of success and the time to value are significantly increased. Increased in terms of the value is realized sooner, not later.
Yeah, okay, your ROI is quicker. But just to add to that, in your previous response, you mentioned the importance of having the real users engaged in the project, isn't it? Right, so that's another side as well. Sort of, we are coming towards the end of the episode now, but the one last question I wanted to ask you, looking at where mobile technologies are heading now, especially on SAP Service and Asset Manager, this could be a general question as well. Where do you foresee mobile EAM solutions in next 3, 5, 10 years?
In terms of innovation, new technology, yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that AI is bound to play quite a significant part as we move forward, no matter what area of business you're in. Enhancing the predictability of maintenance operations, enhancing the understanding of asset health and the capabilities of your workforce, and fine tuning that in terms of this maturity level of your business, I think are the key things that need to be done. There's always a danger that you see, new flashing lights and whizzy-giggy stuff, and you think, oh, I must have that. But if you haven't got the fundamentals in place first, the advantages of engaging is lessened, really. So I think there will be a lot of innovation. Devices will become even more smart, right? More usable. Technicians will become, as we go through, there's always been this argument in a lot of asset-intensive industries ever since I've been working in that area of this concept of the aging workforce. Now, I'm part of the aging workforce nowadays. It's crept up on me. But ultimately, as we move forward in time, the acceptance and ability to adopt and be comfortable with technology and innovative technology moving forwards will be enhanced. Yeah, adoption of the technology will be enhanced because somebody who's 50 today understood about mobile technology 15, 20 years ago in their personal life. Smartphones came online, etc., etc. So as we move forwards, I think that adoption is going to be less pushback, less resistance in the workforce. That's not to say people and technicians in particular and engineers should not be engaged early in the cycle. But I think moving forwards, looking at that technology and bringing it online is going to be a much more comfortable process for a lot of businesses, not just in the asset information, asset intensive space, but broadly. We're all a bit suspect of some of this technology and where it's going, and is AI really the thing, and is it dangerous? Give it 10 years down the track, we'll be much more knowledgeable and much more comfortable. So I think those solutions will develop along those lines, and the user interfaces will become better, the acceptance will become better, and the real key thing here is the efficiency, the safety, all of those things can only be further enhanced as new technology comes on.
That, Dave, marks the end of the session today. It has been very insightful. Thank you very much for coming in, and it has been my absolute pleasure hosting you.
It's been my pleasure too. Thank you very so much for inviting me.